Imagine waking up to the sound of hooves, shouting traders, clanking iron pots, and the pungent mix of spices, sweat, and livestock. Medieval market days weren't cozy little village fairs. They were full-on sensory ambushes. From pickpockets to plague rumors and fishmongers yelling beside fortune-tellers, these chaotic marketplaces were where history didn't whisper, it roared. Tonight, we gently stroll through the madness. But don't worry, here it's quiet, slow, and safe to fall asleep. If your idea of relaxation includes escaping into the wild but forgotten corners of history, then you're among friends. Here, Dost. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so these soft-spoken journeys reach you every sleepy night. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. You find yourself standing in the muddy square of a 13th century English market town, watching as a most peculiar legal proceeding unfolds before your eyes. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, rotting vegetables, and animal dung, while merchants and customers alike pause their haggling to witness what locals call the court of pie powders. Quite literally, the court of dusty feet. This strange institution, with its foreign-sounding name derived from the French pied de poudre, represents one of medieval Europe's most ambitious, yet ultimately futile attempts to impose order on the inherent chaos of market-day commerce. The court convenes in the shadow of the market cross, that weathered stone monument that serves as both the symbolic heart of commercial activity and the literal center of legal authority. The judge, a portly man named Master Geoffrey, who holds the title of steward of the fair, settles his considerable bulk onto a wooden chair that creaks ominously under his weight. His authority extends only as far as the market boundaries, a jurisdiction that begins at sunrise and ends at sunset, lasting no longer than the dusty footprints of traveling merchants who give the court its whimsical name. Before him stands a merchant from Yorkshire, his woolen cloak still bearing the evidence of 3 days' hard travel. Mud splattered to his knees, horsehair clinging to his sleeves, and indeed dust coating his leather boots so thoroughly that his original shoe colour remains a mystery. This merchant, one Robert de Whitby, clutches a crumpled piece of parchment, a contract for the purchase of 20 bolts of fine cloth from a London weaver who has, according to Robert's increasingly agitated testimony, delivered goods that fall considerably short of the promised quality. The defendant, Master Thomas of Cheapside, stands with arms crossed and an expression of practised innocence. His own shoes, you notice, are suspiciously clean for a man who claims to have walked from London. The contrast between the two men's footwear becomes the subject of whispered commentary from the gathered crowd, as if the state of one's shoes might somehow reveal the truth of commercial disputes. Master Geoffrey clears his throat, a sound like grinding millstones, and begins the proceedings by reciting the ancient privileges of the court of pie powders. The jurisdiction of this court, he explains in a voice that carries the weight of centuries of legal precedent, extends to all matters arising within the bounds of the market during the hours of trade. No appeal exists to higher courts, no delay can be granted for absent witnesses, and all decisions must be rendered before the third tide, a poetic way of saying before the sun sets on the third day of market week. The system seems efficient, in theory designed to serve the needs of itinerant merchants who cannot afford to linger in foreign towns waiting for traditional courts to convene. In practice, however, the Court of Pie Powders operates more like a hastily organized theatrical performance than a serious judicial proceeding. The jury consists of 12 local merchants, hastily assembled from whatever tradesmen happen to be, present and willing to abandon their stalls for an hour or two. Their qualifications for judging complex commercial disputes rest primarily on their ability to count money and their possession of reasonably clean clothes. Today's jury includes a baker whose flour-dusted apron suggests he was literally pulled from his ovens, a blacksmith still carrying the acrid smell of hot iron, and a wool merchant whose nervous glances toward his unattended stall suggest his priorities lie elsewhere. The remaining jurors represent a cross-section of the local merchant community. A vintner who has clearly been sampling his own wares, a leather worker whose hands remain permanently stained brown from his trade, and several others whose attention wanders constantly to the ongoing business of the marketplace surrounding the improvised courtroom. The evidence presented follows no recognizable pattern of legal procedure. Robert de Whitby produces his bolt of cloth, unrolling it dramatically to reveal fabric so coarse it could serve as sackcloth. The weave is loose, the color uneven, and when held to the light, holes are visible throughout. "This," he declares with the righteous indignation of a man who has traveled 3 days to air his grievances, "is not the fine wool I contracted to purchase. A peasant's wife would be ashamed to wear such rough material." Master Thomas responds by producing his own sample of cloth, conveniently identical to what Robert purchased. "The fault lies not in my weaving," he argues, "but in this man's unreasonable expectations. The contract specifies wool cloth suitable for middle-class garments, not silk fit for a nobleman's wife." He gestures broadly, his clean hands suggesting he has not personally handled raw wool in some time. The dispute might seem straightforward, but you begin to notice the subtle complexities that make such cases nearly impossible to resolve fairly. Neither man possesses written documentation beyond the basic contract, which specifies only the quantity and general type of cloth to be delivered. No samples were exchanged at the time of agreement. No witnesses were present during the original negotiations, and the definition of fine wool proves to be entirely subjective. Master Geoffrey attempts to maintain order as the two merchants interrupt each other with increasing frequency. Their arguments grow more personal, with Robert questioning Thomas's parentage, and Thomas suggesting that Robert's business acumen ranks somewhere below that of a particularly dim sheep. The jury members exchange glances that suggest this spectacle falls well within the normal range of market-day entertainment. The proceedings are interrupted repeatedly by the noise and activity of the surrounding marketplace. A cart loaded with ale barrels crashes into a poultry stall, sending chickens squawking through the court area and forcing everyone to dodge flying feathers. A pig escapes from its pen and runs directly through the assembled jury, causing 3 men to leap onto chairs and 1 to spill his ale down the front of his tunic. Children chase the pig, while their mothers shout instructions and merchants try to protect their goods from the ensuing chaos. Each interruption requires Master Geoffrey to restore order, a process that seems to require increasing effort as the day progresses. His authority, while theoretically absolute within the market bounds, depends entirely on the voluntary cooperation of people who have pressing business elsewhere. The baker keeps glancing at his ovens, worried about burning bread. The blacksmith's assistant arrives twice to whisper urgent messages about work that cannot wait. The vintner's contribution to the proceedings becomes increasingly incoherent as he continues to sample his merchandise. As the afternoon wears on, you begin to understand why the court of pie powders, despite its noble intentions, often functions more as a source of entertainment than effective dispute resolution. The fundamental problem lies not in the procedures themselves, but in the impossibility of conducting serious legal business in the midst of the controlled chaos that defines market day. Every attempt at formal testimony gets interrupted by the ordinary business of commerce. Horses neighing, dogs barking, children crying, merchants shouting their wares, and the constant background noise of hundreds of people engaged in the complex negotiations that drive medieval economic life. But perhaps this chaos serves a purpose beyond mere inconvenience. As you watch the proceedings unfold, you notice that the informality of the setting seems to strip away the pretense and posturing that characterize more formal legal venues. Robert and Thomas, forced to argue their case in front of their peers, while standing ankle-deep in market mud, cannot rely on fancy legal language or intimidating court procedures. Their dispute must be resolved on its merits, such as they are, by people who understand the practical realities of commercial life. Yet this democratic approach to justice carries its own problems, as you're about to discover in the events that will unfold throughout the remainder of this chaotic market day. For the Court of Pie Powders, with all its good intentions and ancient privileges, was about to encounter a dispute that would test not only its procedures, but its very ability to maintain order in a marketplace where economic interests, personal pride, and age-old rivalries converged in ways that no legal framework could adequately address. The afternoon sun slants lower across the marketplace as Master Geoffrey attempts to bring some semblance of order to the increasingly farcical proceedings of his Court of Pie Powders. What began as a straightforward commercial dispute between Robert de Whitby and Master Thomas has evolved into something resembling a village festival, complete with an audience that treats each legal pronouncement as entertainment worthy of commentary, jeering, and occasional applause. You watch as Master Geoffrey calls for the examination of evidence, a process that in more formal courts might involve careful scrutiny by learned officials. Here, the 12-man jury passes the disputed cloth, from hand to hand like children, sharing a particularly interesting toy. The baker kneads it between his flour-dusted fingers, testing its texture with the same serious attention he might give to bread dough. The blacksmith holds it up to the light, squinting through the weave as if examining metal for flaws. The vintner, now definitely worse for his product sampling, declares it perfectly suitable for wrapping fish, a pronouncement that sends ripples of laughter through the gathered crowd. The leather worker, whose expertise presumably extends to evaluating different materials, provides the most detailed analysis. He stretches the fabric, examining the twist of individual threads and the consistency of the weave. His weathered hands, permanently stained from years of handling hides, move with surprising delicacy as he tests the cloth's strength and flexibility. "The wool is adequate," he announces, "but the weaving shows haste. See how the threads bunch here and slack there? This cloth will not wear evenly." His professional assessment seems to offer hope for a reasonable resolution, but Master Thomas immediately objects. "The learned leather worker," he says with evident sarcasm, "mistakes careful economy for poor craftsmanship. Not every cloth need be woven for a king's ransom. This fabric serves its intended purpose admirably." He gestures toward his own clothes, which appear to be cut from similar material. "I wear my own product with pride." Robert de Whitby seizes on this admission. "Aha! Then you acknowledge this rough cloth as your usual standard? My contract specified fine wool, not your everyday mediocrity." His voice rises with the satisfaction of a man who believes he has scored a telling point. The argument might have continued in this vein for hours, but the proceedings take an unexpected turn when a commotion erupts from the direction of the grain merchant's stalls. A young woman, her apron covered in flour and her hair escaping from its cap, pushes through the crowd surrounding the court. She approaches Master Geoffrey with the determined stride of someone accustomed to being obeyed, despite her obvious youth and relatively humble station. "Master Steward," she calls, slightly out of breath from her hurried approach, "I must interrupt these proceedings with an urgent matter that touches upon the very case before your court." The crowd murmurs with renewed interest, sensing that the day's entertainment is far from over. This is Margot, daughter of Hugh the Miller, and her appearance transforms the dynamic of the entire proceeding. You learn, through whispered commentary from nearby merchants, that she possesses something rare in medieval commerce, a detailed knowledge of textile production gained from years of preparing flax and hemp for her father's customers. More importantly, she has been watching the trial with growing frustration at what she perceives as fundamental ignorance about cloth quality. Master Geoffrey, already struggling to maintain his authority over the increasingly unruly proceedings, finds himself faced with a dilemma. The established procedures of the Court of Pie Powders make no provision for testimony from young women who happen to possess relevant expertise. Yet the crowd clearly expects him to hear what she has to say, and her reputation for practical knowledge carries weight in the community. "Speak quickly," he commands, "but remember that this court recognizes only the testimony of established merchants." It's a compromise that satisfies no one completely, but allows the proceedings to continue without completely abandoning legal precedent. Margot steps forward and, without ceremony, takes the disputed cloth from the vintner's unsteady hands. Her examination is swift but thorough, conducted with the confidence of someone who has handled textiles since childhood. She stretches the fabric, holds it to the light, and even brings it close to her nose to smell it, a technique that draws chuckles from the audience but proves remarkably revealing. "This cloth," she announces, "has been artificially treated to appear finer than its true quality. The wool has been brushed to raise the nap, hiding the coarseness of the weave. The color has been enhanced with cheap dyes that will fade after the first washing. Most telling, it has been sized with glue water to give it temporary stiffness and weight." She looks directly at Master Thomas. "It is, in short, a deliberate deception designed to pass inferior goods off as higher quality." The marketplace falls, unusually quiet as the implications of her assessment sink in. If her analysis is correct, this is not merely a case of disappointed expectations but actual fraud, a charge that carries serious penalties under medieval commercial law. Master Thomas's face reddens. Whether from anger or embarrassment is difficult to determine. "The girl speaks nonsense," he sputters. "What knowledge can a miller's daughter possess of the weaver's craft? This is an attempt to bias the court with irrelevant testimony from an unqualified witness." His objection follows proper legal form, but his obvious discomfort suggests Margot's observations have struck uncomfortably close to the truth. Robert de Whitby, meanwhile, looks like a man who has suddenly discovered that his disappointing purchase might actually represent a significant legal victory. "I demand that this evidence of deliberate fraud be considered by the court," he declares. "If Master Thomas has knowingly delivered inferior goods while claiming superior quality, he has violated not merely our contract but the ancient laws of fair dealing that govern all market transactions." Master Geoffrey finds himself in an increasingly precarious position. The Court of Pie Powders was designed to handle straightforward commercial disputes quickly and efficiently. Accusations of fraud require more serious consideration, potentially involving penalties that extend beyond simple contract remedies. Yet the court's limited authority and informal procedures make it poorly equipped to handle complex investigations into criminal behavior. The jury members exchange uncertain glances. The baker, who has been following the proceedings with growing interest, raises a flour-dusted hand. "Master Steward," he says, "if we are to consider charges of fraud, should we not examine other examples of this merchant's cloth? Surely, if deception was intended, this cannot be an isolated instance." His suggestion triggers immediate chaos. Several merchants in the crowd step forward, claiming they too have purchased cloth from Master Thomas and now suspect they may have been similarly deceived. A wool merchant from the next county waves a bolt of fabric, demanding it be examined. A tailor's wife pushes through the crowd, carrying a partially completed garment that she claims fell apart after the first wearing. Master Geoffrey pounds his staff on the ground, attempting to restore order, but the proceedings have clearly escaped his control. What began as a simple contract dispute has evolved into something approaching a popular uprising, against a merchant whose business practices are suddenly under scrutiny by every person who has ever purchased cloth in the regional market network. The situation deteriorates further when Master Thomas, faced with mounting accusations and an increasingly hostile crowd, makes the tactical error of questioning the competence and authority of the entire court. This, he declares with injured dignity, is no proper legal proceeding, but a mob gathering designed to rob an honest merchant of his rightful profits. I demand transfer to a proper court where learned judges, not flour-covered bakers and drunken vintners, will consider the evidence. His words, intended to assert his legal rights, instead inflame an already volatile situation. The jury members, most of whom take considerable pride in their commercial expertise and social standing, do not appreciate being dismissed as incompetent peasants. The baker steps forward, his face flushed with anger. "Are you suggesting, Master Thomas, that the established merchants of this town lack the wisdom to recognize good cloth from bad? Perhaps you believe that only London weavers possess sufficient intelligence for such complex determinations." The crowd murmurs agreement with the baker's challenge. Regional pride, always a potent force in medieval communities, has now entered the equation alongside commercial interests and legal procedures. What started as a dispute over cloth quality has become a confrontation between local authority and outside merchants, between established community standards and the profit-driven practices of itinerant traders. You realize, as the chaos continues, to build around the improvised courtroom, that the court of pie powders is about to face its ultimate test. The very informality and democratic spirit that make it theoretically superior to more rigid legal institutions are now threatening to destroy any possibility of reaching a fair resolution. When justice becomes a public spectacle, when legal procedures compete with market-day entertainment, and when personal reputations and community pride override careful consideration of evidence, how can any court hope to maintain both authority and legitimacy? As the autumn shadows lengthen across the marketplace, you witness what might be described as the complete institutional failure of medieval commercial justice. The Court of Pie Powders, that ancient and theoretically efficient system for resolving merchant disputes, has devolved into something resembling a particularly chaotic village festival, complete with partisan crowds, competing testimonies, and the kind of procedural breakdown that would make even the most patient legal scholar weep with frustration. Master Geoffrey, the court's presiding steward, sits slumped in his wooden chair like a general surveying a battlefield after decisive defeat. His authority, which seemed so absolute when the proceedings began this morning, has been steadily eroded by the democratic chaos that characterizes medieval market life. The 12-man jury, originally selected for their commercial expertise and community standing, now resembles nothing so much as a drinking party that has somehow acquired legal responsibilities. The vintner, whose wine sampling has progressed from professional tasting to obvious intoxication, attempts to offer what he considers profound legal wisdom. "The question before us," he announces with the careful enunciation of a man fighting to appear sober, "is not whether the cloth is good or bad, but whether badness in cloth constitutes goodness in law." His statement, which might actually contain some philosophical merit if properly examined, draws appreciative chuckles from the crowd and despairing looks from his fellow jurors. Meanwhile, the original dispute between Robert de Whitby and Master Thomas has been completely overshadowed by the growing number of complainants who have emerged from the marketplace. What began as a single accusation of contract violation has mushroomed into a comprehensive indictment of one merchant's entire business practice. A steady stream of customers approaches the improvised court area, each carrying evidence of allegedly defective cloth and each demanding satisfaction from Master Thomas. Margot, the miller's daughter, whose expert testimony initially appeared to clarify the technical issues at stake, now finds herself in the unprecedented position of serving as unofficial quality inspector for a parade of textile complaints. She examines each piece of fabric with the same thorough attention she gave to the original evidence, her findings becoming increasingly damning. Cloth after cloth shows evidence of the same deceptive practices: artificial stiffening, enhanced coloring, brushed surfaces designed to hide inferior weaving, and sizing treatments that will disappear with the first serious washing. This merchant, she declares after examining the 7th or 8th sample, has built his entire business on the assumption that his customers lack the knowledge to detect his deceptions. Each piece shows the same pattern of fraud, good enough to pass casual inspection, certain to fail under actual use. Her words carry particular weight because she profits nothing from the dispute and clearly possesses the technical expertise to make such judgments. Master Thomas, faced with mounting evidence and an increasingly hostile crowd, attempts to salvage his position through a combination of legal technicalities and personal attacks. These accusations, he argues, represent nothing more than buyer's remorse elevated to criminal charges. Every merchant knows that customers who make poor decisions prefer to blame their suppliers rather than acknowledge their own failures of judgment. His defense strategy proves catastrophically ill-advised. By suggesting that his customers are either stupid or dishonest, he manages to offend virtually everyone present while providing no substantive response to the technical evidence against him. The crowd's murmurs grow louder and more hostile, and several men push forward with expressions that suggest they have moved beyond merely seeking financial compensation. Master Geoffrey recognizes that the situation is spiraling beyond his control, but the procedures of the Court of Pie Powders provide little guidance for managing what has become a community uprising disguised as a legal proceeding. His authority depends entirely on the voluntary cooperation of the participants, and that cooperation is clearly dissolving as rapidly as the sizing in Master Thomas's fraudulent cloth. The crisis deepens when someone in the crowd, later investigations, will never identify exactly who, throws a rotten apple that strikes Master Thomas on the shoulder. The projectile, while relatively harmless, represents a symbolic crossing of the line between legal proceedings and popular justice. The crowd cheers the unknown assailant, and more fruit begins flying through the air. Master Geoffrey rises from his chair, pounding his staff frantically while shouting for order, but his voice is lost in the growing chaos. The jury members, recognizing that their safety depends on distancing themselves from the proceedings, begin to edge away from the court area. The baker mutters something about burning bread and disappears into the crowd. The blacksmith remembers urgent work at his forge. Even the vintner, despite his alcohol-impaired judgment, possesses sufficient survival instinct to seek safer ground. What happens next depends largely on one's perspective and position within the unfolding drama. From Master Thomas's viewpoint, he faces an angry mob that has abandoned all pretense of legal procedure in favor of popular violence. His repeated requests for proper judicial process are ignored, his attempts to present evidence are shouted down, and his personal safety appears increasingly precarious as more merchants step forward with complaints about his business practices. From the crowd's perspective, however, they are witnessing the exposure of systematic commercial fraud that has affected dozens of honest customers. Master Thomas's refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing, combined with his insulting characterization of his victims, has transformed a simple contract dispute into a confrontation between predatory business practices and community standards of fair dealing. The situation reaches its climax when Master Thomas, recognizing that formal legal procedures have completely broken down, attempts to leave the marketplace with whatever dignity he can salvage. His departure, however, requires him to walk through a crowd that has been growing steadily more hostile throughout the afternoon's proceeding. As he pushes through the assembled merchants and customers, someone grabs at his cloak. Whether this represents an attempt to physically detain him, or simply a desire to examine his own clothing for evidence of the same fraudulent materials, is never determined. The physical contact triggers a melee that spreads rapidly through the immediate area. Master Thomas swings his travelling pack at his attackers, striking a wool merchant's wife and causing her to fall backward into a stall selling pottery. The crash of breaking ceramics adds to the chaos as the potter begins demanding compensation for his destroyed goods. Other merchants rush to assist either Master Thomas or his accusers, depending on their own experiences with his business practices and their personal relationships within the community. You watch in fascination as the Court of Pie Powders, that ancient institution designed to bring order to commercial disputes, becomes the focal point of exactly the kind of marketplace chaos it was created to prevent. Master Geoffrey continues to shout for order while backing away from the developing riot. His staff of office, symbol of legal authority, proves utterly ineffective against the democratic fury of customers who feel they have been systematically defrauded. The violence, when it finally erupts, proves both brief and relatively mild by medieval standards. A few punches are thrown, some shoving occurs, and Master Thomas's travelling pack is torn open, spilling its contents across the muddy ground. The sight of additional cloth samples, along with what appears to be a collection of artificial sizing materials and cheap dyes, provides final confirmation of the accusations against the merchant. But the real damage is not physical violence against Master Thomas, though he certainly receives his share of rough treatment, but the complete collapse of the legal framework that was supposed to govern such disputes. The Court of Pie Powders, faced with a situation that exceeded its procedural capabilities and challenged its fundamental assumptions about orderly commerce, simply ceases to function. Master Geoffrey eventually restores enough order to formally dissolve the court session, but his pronouncement carries little authority and satisfies no one. Master Thomas, his clothes torn and his dignity shredded, manages to collect most of his scattered belongings and leave the marketplace under the protection of two merchants who feel obligated to prevent actual violence regardless of their opinions about his business practices. Robert de Whitby, the original plaintiff whose simple contract dispute triggered the entire affair, finds himself with no legal resolution to his complaint. The court that was supposed to provide swift justice has collapsed into chaos, leaving him exactly where he started, but with considerably more knowledge about the systemic nature of the problems he encountered. As evening approaches and the marketplace begins to empty, you reflect on the day's events and their implications for medieval commercial life. The Court of Pie Powders, despite its democratic ideals and practical procedures, has revealed fundamental limitations when confronted with disputes that extend beyond simple contract violations into accusations of systematic fraud. When legal authority depends on voluntary cooperation, when procedures assume good faith from all participants, and when community standards conflict with individual profit motives, the resulting chaos becomes perhaps inevitable. Yet perhaps this chaos serves its own purpose in the broader economy of medieval justice. Master Thomas, though he escaped physical harm and legal penalties, has been effectively banished from this market and will likely find his reputation preceding him to other commercial centres. The community has reasserted its standards of fair dealing, even if through extra-legal means, and future merchants, having witnessed the consequences of systematic deception, may think twice before attempting similar fraudulent practices. The Court of Pie Powders will convene again next market day, as it has for centuries and will continue to do for centuries more. Master Geoffrey will resume his chair, new juries will be empanelled, and fresh disputes will be adjudicated with the same democratic chaos and occasional wisdom that characterized today's proceedings. For in the end, medieval justice, like medieval commerce itself, depends less on perfect procedures than on the willingness of imperfect people to muddle through toward approximately fair outcomes, one chaotic market day at a time. You stand in the pre-dawn darkness of a medieval bakery, watching as Master Edmund the baker begins his most crucial daily ritual. Not the mixing of dough or the lighting of ovens, but the careful manipulation of weights and measures that will determine his profit margins for the entire day. The year is 1347, and you are witnessing the systematic circumvention of one of medieval England's most comprehensive attempts at commercial regulation, the Assize of Bread and Ale, a legal framework so detailed and ambitious that its very complexity makes widespread evasion almost inevitable. Master Edmund, a man whose flour-dusted apron cannot quite conceal the comfortable prosperity of a successful tradesman, moves between his work tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who has reduced deception to routine. His hands, permanently stained white from years of handling flour, work with two sets of measuring devices, the official weights and scales prominently displayed for inspection by market officials, and a secondary collection of subtly altered instruments hidden beneath sacks of grain and behind storage jars. The Assize of Bread and Ale, established in 1266 and refined through decades of additional legislation, represents medieval government's most ambitious attempt to regulate the production and sale of life's most essential commodities. The law specifies not only the weight and price of bread loaves, but also their ingredients, preparation methods, and even the profit margins that bakers may legitimately earn. On parchment, it appears to be a masterpiece of comprehensive commercial regulation. In practice, as you are about to observe, it has created an underground economy of measurement fraud that touches every aspect of the bread trade. Master Edmund's official scale, the one he will display when the market inspector makes his weekly rounds, has been carefully calibrated to meet legal requirements. Its brass weights gleam with recent polishing, and its wooden beam shows the careful craftsmanship expected of instruments used in regulated commerce. This scale will produce loaves that meet exactly the specifications laid down by royal decree. 1 penny loaves weighing precisely 16 ounces when wheat costs 4 shillings per quarter, with proportional adjustments for fluctuations in grain prices according to a complex formula that assumes mathematical literacy among both bakers and market officials. But beneath a pile of empty flour sacks lies Master Edmund's working scale, the instrument he actually uses for daily bread production. This device, superficially identical to its legal counterpart, incorporates subtle modifications that would be nearly impossible to detect without direct comparison. The brass weights have been carefully hollowed out and filled with lighter materials, reducing their actual mass by approximately 10%. The wooden beam has been shortened by a fraction of an inch on one side, creating a mechanical advantage that further distorts measurements. Most ingeniously, the fulcrum point has been adjusted so slightly that even an experienced user might not notice the difference without careful testing. These modifications allow Master Edmund to produce loaves that appear to meet legal requirements, while actually containing significantly less flour than regulations specify. A 1 penny loaf that should weigh 16 ounces emerges from his ovens weighing 14 ounces or less, but its shape and appearance match customer expectations so closely that the deception passes unnoticed in the ordinary course of business. The saved flour represents pure profit, accumulating day by day into a substantial economic advantage over competitors who attempt to follow the law precisely. You watch as Master Edmund's apprentice, a boy named Will, whose cheerful demeanor masks a thorough education in commercial deception, begins the process of preparing dough for the day's first batch of bread. The recipe he follows appears to meet all legal requirements: proper proportions of wheat flour, water, salt, and yeast, mixed according to traditional methods that produce bread of acceptable quality and appearance. But even here, small deceptions compound into significant economic benefits. The flour itself, supposedly pure wheat ground to regulation standards, contains a carefully measured admixture of cheaper grains. Barley flour, nearly indistinguishable from wheat when properly ground and mixed, comprises perhaps 15% of the total. A smaller quantity of bean flour adds protein and helps maintain the proper texture while reducing costs even further. Most cleverly, a small amount of chalk dust, the same material used for whitening walls, brightens the bread's appearance and creates the impression of higher quality flour while adding weight that disguises the reduced grain content. The water used in bread preparation comes from the town well, theoretically pure, and certainly free to any baker who cares to carry it from the market square. But Master Edmund has discovered that water drawn from his own cellar cistern, though cloudier and less pleasant to taste, actually improves his profit margins through an unexpected mechanism. The cistern water contains higher levels of dissolved minerals that make the dough absorb more liquid during mixing. This allows him to add extra water without affecting the bread's texture, effectively selling water at the price of wheat flour. Even the salt, mandated by law to preserve the bread and enhance its flavor, becomes part of the deception. The regulation specifies good white salt suitable for bread making, but Master Edmund uses sea salt that has been inadequately purified, leaving behind trace amounts of sand and other minerals that add weight without contributing to food value. The customers taste the proper saltiness they expect, but they also purchase small quantities of worthless material at premium prices. Young Will works with the cheerful efficiency of someone who has never known any other method of bread production. To him, these practices represent normal business operations rather than systematic fraud. He measures flour with the altered scales, adds water from the mineral-rich cistern, and incorporates the various adulterants with the same care he would give to genuine ingredients. His innocence serves as a form of protection for Master Edmund, since the boy's honest demeanor helps deflect suspicion from customers who might otherwise question the bakery's operations. The morning's work proceeds with mechanical precision, as Master Edmund and his apprentice shape loaves designed to maximize profit while minimizing risk of detection. Each loaf is carefully formed to appear larger than its actual weight would suggest. The dough is stretched and shaped to create maximum surface area, giving the impression of substantial size. Air pockets are deliberately incorporated into the dough structure, creating bread that feels satisfyingly large when handled, but contains less actual nutrition per loaf. The baking process itself offers additional opportunities for deception. Master Edmund's ovens, built to his own specifications rather than following traditional designs, operate at slightly lower temperatures than normal. This produces bread with a darker, more appealing crust that suggests thorough baking and high quality. The extended baking time required by the lower temperature also drives out more moisture, concentrating flavors and creating the impression of dense, substantial bread while actually reducing the final weight of each loaf. As the morning progresses and the first batch of bread emerges from the ovens, you begin to understand the systematic nature of medieval commercial fraud. Every aspect of Master Edmund's operation, from the procurement of raw materials to the final presentation of finished products, incorporates small deceptions that compound into substantial economic advantages. None of these practices would be immediately obvious to casual customers, and many would be difficult to detect even through careful investigation. The genius of Master Edmund's system lies not in any single dramatic violation of commercial law, but in the accumulation of numerous small deceptions that collectively undermine the entire regulatory framework. The assize of bread and ale, despite its comprehensive scope and detailed specifications, cannot account for the infinite creativity of merchants seeking to maximize profits within the letter, if not the spirit of the law. But Master Edmund's operations do not exist in isolation. As you will soon discover, his systematic approach to regulatory evasion is neither unique nor particularly innovative. Throughout the medieval commercial world, similar schemes operate with the tacit knowledge and occasional participation of the very officials charged with preventing such fraud. The morning's bread production represents just one small part of a much larger underground economy that thrives precisely because the legal framework designed to prevent it has become so complex and unwieldy that consistent enforcement proves practically impossible. The first customers will arrive soon, drawn by the appealing aroma of fresh bread and the promise of fair dealing guaranteed by royal regulation. They will examine Master Edmund's official weights and scales, satisfy themselves that his prices comply with posted requirements, and purchase their daily bread with confidence that government oversight protects them from commercial exploitation. What they cannot know is that the very comprehensiveness of that protection has created opportunities for systematic deception that would have been impossible under a simpler, more direct regulatory approach. As Master Edmund arranges his first batch of loaves for display, you realize that you are witnessing not merely individual criminal behavior, but the inevitable consequence of attempting to regulate complex commercial relationships through detailed legal specifications. The more comprehensive the regulations become, the more opportunities they create for creative evasion. The more precisely they define acceptable practices, the more clearly they reveal the boundaries of unacceptable but undetectable alternatives. The first pale light of dawn illuminates the marketplace as Master Hugh, the ale conner, makes his weekly rounds carrying the brass-bound staff of office that marks him as one of medieval England's most futile functionaries, an official charged with enforcing regulations so complex and contradictory that successful compliance has become virtually impossible for merchants and inspectors alike. You follow at a respectful distance as Master Hugh approaches his first stop of the day, the prosperous bakery operated by Master Edmund, whose systematic evasion of bread regulations represents exactly the kind of sophisticated fraud that makes Hugh's job a perpetual exercise in frustration. Master Hugh, a man whose lean frame and permanently worried expression suggest the psychological toll of attempting to enforce unenforceable laws, carries with him the tools of his trade, a set of certified weights, a measuring rod marked with legal standards, and a leather satchel containing the written regulations that govern every aspect of bread and ale production. These regulations, copied by hand onto expensive parchment and sealed with official wax, represent the accumulated wisdom of generations of royal administrators who believed that sufficient detail in lawmaking could eliminate the chaos of commercial life. In practice, these documents serve primarily as evidence of the gap between governmental ambition and practical reality. The regulations Master Hugh carries specify not only the weight and ingredients of bread loaves, but also the precise profit margins bakers may earn, calculated according to a sliding scale that adjusts for fluctuations in grain prices, seasonal variations in demand, and regional differences in production costs. The mathematical complexity of these calculations assumes a level of numerical literacy that exists primarily in royal chancelleries rather than marketplace stalls. Most bakers, if they can read at all, certainly cannot perform the arithmetic required to determine their legal profit margins on any given day. Master Hugh's approach to Master Edmund's bakery follows a routine established through years of mutual accommodation between regulator and regulated. He announces his presence with a formal declaration of authority, displaying his brass-bound staff and reciting the legal formulas that grant him power to inspect weights, measures, and merchandise quality. Master Edmund responds with equally formal expressions of cooperation and respect for royal authority, while simultaneously directing his apprentice Will to ensure that only the official measuring devices remain visible. The inspection begins with examination of the bread scales, the centerpiece of regulatory compliance, and the focus of most customer concerns about fair dealing. Master Hugh produces his certified weights, each one marked with official stamps and accompanied by documentation verifying its accuracy according to royal standards. He places these weights on Master Edmund's scale, watching carefully as the balance arm settles into position. The scale performs flawlessly, producing measurements that match legal requirements with precision that would satisfy the most demanding royal inspector. Master Hugh nods approvingly and makes careful notations in his record book, documenting compliance with weight regulations. What he cannot know, and what his inspection procedures cannot detect, is that he has just verified the accuracy of equipment that Master Edmund uses only for these formal inspections. The examination of bread quality follows established protocols that appear comprehensive, but actually test only the most superficial characteristics of the finished product. Master Hugh cuts into a sample loaf, examining the texture and color of the interior crumb. He checks for proper rising, adequate salt content, and appropriate moisture levels. He ensures that the crust shows evidence of thorough baking, and that the overall appearance meets standards established by traditional practice. Each test confirms that Master Edmund's bread meets regulatory requirements. The loaf cuts cleanly, revealing an interior that appears properly mixed and adequately risen. The taste satisfies expectations for bread made from quality wheat flour and pure water. The texture feels substantial and nourishing by every measure. Available to Master Hugh's inspection procedures, this bread represents exactly the kind of honest production that the Assize of Bread and Ale was designed to encourage. Yet Master Hugh's success in verifying regulatory compliance has actually confirmed the sophistication of Master Edmund's deceptive practices. The bread that passes inspection has been carefully prepared to meet all detectable standards, while incorporating numerous adulterants and using measurement fraud that remains invisible to standard testing procedures. The baker's skill lies not in violating regulations, but in violating them so skillfully that the violations cannot be detected through normal enforcement mechanisms. The inspection of raw materials presents even greater challenges to effective oversight. Master Hugh examines Master Edmund's stores of flour, checking for proper color, texture, and freedom from obvious adulterants. The flour appears to be high-quality wheat, properly ground and stored according to traditional methods. What Hugh cannot determine without laboratory analysis unavailable in medieval times is that the flour contains significant quantities of cheaper grains and mineral additives that escape detection through visual and tactile examination. The water supply receives cursory attention, since regulations assume that bakers will use the common well that provides drinking water for the entire community. Master Hugh notes that Master Edmund has access to the public water source and assumes reasonably, but incorrectly, that this constitutes compliance with purity requirements. He cannot know that the baker actually uses mineral-rich cistern water that improves profit margins while remaining technically within legal boundaries. Even the salt and yeast receive inspection, though these examinations prove similarly superficial. Master Hugh verifies that salt appears clean and white, meeting visual standards for purity. He checks that yeast shows proper activity when mixed with warm water. These tests confirm that basic ingredients meet minimum quality standards, but cannot detect the subtle adulterations that allow Master Edmund to reduce costs while maintaining acceptable product quality. As the inspection proceeds, you begin to recognize the fundamental impossibility of Master Hugh's position. The regulations he enforces assume that detailed legal specifications can prevent commercial fraud, but they actually create opportunities for sophisticated deception that exceed the detection capabilities of any practical enforcement system. The more precisely the law defines acceptable practices, the more clearly it reveals the boundaries of unacceptable but undetectable alternatives. Master Hugh's personal situation compounds the difficulties inherent in his official duties. As Ale Connor, he receives compensation based on fees collected from merchants who violate regulations. This creates obvious incentives to find violations whether they exist or not, but it also creates pressure to maintain good relationships with the merchants he regulates. Bakers and brewers who feel unfairly persecuted can make his job miserable through various forms of passive resistance, while those who cooperate make his rounds pleasant and profitable. Master Edmund understands these dynamics perfectly and has cultivated a relationship with Master Hugh based on mutual respect and carefully managed compliance. He ensures that his formal inspections proceed smoothly, his weights and measures pass all tests, and his products meet every detectable standard. In return, Master Hugh treats him as a responsible merchant who deserves minimal scrutiny and maximum cooperation. This accommodation serves both men's interests while completely undermining the regulatory system they pretend to support. Master Hugh can report successful enforcement of commercial regulations, documenting compliance rates that suggest effective government oversight. Master Edmund can operate his sophisticated fraud scheme with minimal risk of detection, secure in the knowledge that passing formal inspections provides protection against more serious legal consequences. The morning's inspection concludes with Master Hugh's examination of pricing compliance, perhaps the most complex aspect of bread regulation, and certainly the most difficult to enforce effectively. The assize of bread and ale establishes bread prices according to a formula that considers current grain costs, traditional profit margins, and regional economic conditions. The calculations required to determine legal prices on any given day challenge the mathematical abilities of both inspectors and merchants. Master Hugh produces a chart showing current grain prices in regional markets, documented through reports from other officials and adjusted for transportation costs and local market conditions. He compares these figures to Master Edmund's posted prices, performing arithmetic that assumes both men understand the complex formulas specified in royal regulations. The calculations confirm that bread prices fall within acceptable ranges, though the margin for error in these computations probably exceeds the actual profit margins the regulations attempt to control. What neither man acknowledges explicitly is that the pricing regulations, however mathematically sophisticated, cannot account for the quality variations that allow Master Edmund to maintain legal prices while selling inferior products. By reducing the actual flour content of his bread while maintaining acceptable appearance and taste, the baker achieves profit margins far exceeding those contemplated by legal formulas. The price compliance that Master Hugh verifies has become meaningless because it measures the wrong variables. The inspection concludes with formal expressions of mutual satisfaction. Master Hugh records another successful verification of regulatory compliance, adding Master Edmund's bakery to his growing list of merchants who meet legal standards. Master Edmund receives official confirmation that his business practices satisfy royal requirements providing protection against customer complaints and legal challenges. Both men have fulfilled their formal obligations while participating in a systematic undermining of the regulatory framework they publicly support. As Master Hugh moves on to his next inspection, you realize that you have witnessed not merely the failure of individual enforcement, but the collapse of an entire approach to commercial regulation. The assize of bread and ale, despite its comprehensive scope and detailed specifications, cannot prevent sophisticated fraud because it addresses symptoms rather than causes. By focusing on measurements and procedures rather than outcomes and incentives, the regulations create opportunities for exactly the kind of deception they were designed to prevent. The fundamental problem lies not in the competence or honesty of individual officials like Master Hugh, but in the impossibility of using detailed legal specifications to govern complex commercial relationships. Every attempt to close regulatory loopholes creates new opportunities for creative evasion. Every effort to make enforcement more precise makes it easier for sophisticated merchants to circumvent detection. The result is a system that appears to provide comprehensive protection while actually facilitating systematic fraud on a scale that would be impossible without the regulatory framework that supposedly prevents it. The catastrophe begins on a Tuesday morning in late October when young Will, the baker's apprentice, makes a mistake that will expose the sophisticated fraud network operating beneath the veneer of regulated commerce in medieval England. You watch as the boy, distracted by the commotion of an overturned ale cart in the street outside, reaches for the wrong set of measuring weights while preparing the day's first batch of dough. Instead of Master Edmund's carefully altered fraud implements, he grasps the official weights used only for inspections and begins measuring flour according to the legal specifications that the bakery has systematically violated for years. The error seems minor at first, a difference in measurement so slight that even experienced bakers might not notice immediately. But Master Edmund, whose prosperity depends on maintaining precise control over ingredient ratios and production costs, recognizes the problem as soon as he examines the mixed dough. The texture feels different, the consistency appears altered, and the quantities involved suggest that this batch will cost significantly more to produce than normal while yielding loaves that actually meet legal weight requirements. Master Edmund's immediate reaction reveals the depth of his psychological investment in the fraud system that has become his normal business practice. Rather than simply accepting the loss of profit from one batch of correctly measured bread, he flies into a rage that attracts attention from neighboring merchants and customers in the marketplace. His shouting draws a crowd of curious onlookers, who witness his detailed accusations against poor Will, including specific descriptions of measurement discrepancies that no honest baker should be able to calculate so precisely. "You stupid boy!" Master Edmund bellows, his flour-dusted face flushed with anger and growing alarm. "Do you realize what you've done? This batch will cost us 3 pence more to produce, and the loaves will weigh 2 ounces heavier than they should." His words, intended to educate his apprentice, instead provide listening merchants with exact figures that suggest systematic manipulation of weights and measures. Young Will, confused and frightened by his master's unexpected fury, attempts to defend himself by explaining his careful attention to the measurements. "But master," he protests, "I used the brass weights just as you taught me, and measured the flour exactly as the regulations require." His innocent response, delivered in a voice loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear clearly, inadvertently reveals that the bakery normally uses different weights and measurement procedures than those mandated by law. The crowd's murmuring grows louder as the implications of this exchange become clear to the more experienced merchants present. Margaret the fish seller, whose sharp eyes and sharper tongue have made her an unofficial monitor of marketplace fairness, pushes forward to examine the disputed dough. Her knowledge of proper bread-making procedures, gained through years of observing various bakers and comparing their products, allows her to recognize immediately that Will's measurements have produced dough with significantly higher flour content than Master Edmund's normal production. "This dough," she announces after kneading a sample between her experienced fingers, "contains proper wheat flour in legal proportions. It feels nothing like the bread this baker normally produces." Her statement, delivered with the authority of someone who handles food products daily, carries enormous weight with the assembled customers and merchants. Master Edmund realizes too late that his angry outburst has created exactly the kind of public scrutiny that his fraud system was designed to avoid. His attempts to control the damage only make the situation worse, as each explanation reveals additional details about his illegal practices. When he claims that Will has used the wrong weights, customers demand to see these alternative measuring devices. When he argues that the dough contains too much flour, merchants want to know why proper measurements would create such problems. The crisis deepens when Master Edmund, in desperation, attempts to dispose of the evidence by claiming that Will's measurements represent a simple training exercise rather than actual bread production. This explanation requires him to dump the disputed dough into a waste bucket, an action that horrifies the watching crowd. Wasting good flour during a period of uncertain harvests violates both economic common sense and community standards of food stewardship. Margaret the fish seller immediately challenges this waste, demanding that Master Edmund explain why properly. Measured dough should be discarded rather than baked into bread. Her question forces him to choose between admitting his fraud or providing some alternative explanation for his bizarre behavior. Either option threatens to expose the systematic deception that has supported his business for years. The situation spirals completely out of control when Sarah, the alewife, whose own business dealings with Master Edmund have involved suspicious discrepancies in grain purchases, steps forward with additional accusations. She has noticed that Master Edmund consistently buys more grain than his bread production should require, suggesting either significant waste or the use of adulterants that stretch flour supplies beyond normal ratios. "This baker," Sarah declares, "purchases grain like a man feeding an army, but produces bread like a man serving a handful of customers. Either he's the most wasteful baker in England, or he's adding materials that don't appear in his ingredient lists." Her mathematical analysis, based on careful observation of purchasing patterns over several months, provides supporting evidence for the fraud accusations that are rapidly gathering momentum. Other merchants begin sharing their own observations and suspicions. The wool merchant mentions seeing Master Edmund purchasing large quantities of barley flour, supposedly for animal feed, but delivered to his bakery rather than any stable or farmyard. The miller's wife recalls conversations about unusual requests for chalk and other mineral additives that have no obvious legitimate use in bread production. Each revelation adds another piece to a puzzle that reveals systematic fraud on a scale far exceeding anyone's initial suspicions. Master Edmund's position becomes untenable when Master Hugh, the ale conner, arrives to investigate the disturbance, bringing with him the official weights and measures used for regulatory inspections. The crowd immediately demands that he conduct an impromptu inspection of Master Edmund's equipment, comparing the official standards to whatever measuring devices the baker actually uses for daily production. The inspection that follows represents Master Hugh's worst nightmare, a public examination of regulatory compliance conducted in front of an hostile crowd that has already reached conclusions about merchant fraud. His usual routine of private, cooperative inspections has been replaced by a confrontational public proceeding, where his competence and honesty face scrutiny, along with the merchant's business practices. Master Hugh's examination of Master Edmund's hidden weights reveals discrepancies that even his cursory inspection procedures cannot miss. The altered weights are significantly lighter than legal standards, the modified scale beam produces incorrect measurements, and the collection of adulterants hidden throughout the bakery provides clear evidence of systematic ingredient fraud. Each discovery generates angry responses from the crowd and increasingly desperate explanations from Master Edmund. The crisis reaches its climax when someone in the crowd demands that Master Hugh test a sample of Master Edmund's regular bread against the legal requirements for weight and quality. This comparison, conducted in full view of angry customers who have been purchasing allegedly fraudulent products for months or years, reveals that the baker's normal production fails to meet regulatory standards by substantial margins. The bread weighs less than legal requirements specify, contains obvious adulterants that compromise both quality and nutritional value, and shows evidence of the systematic measurement fraud that Master Edmund has used to inflate his profit margins. Each test result generates louder protests from the crowd and more frantic denials from the increasingly isolated baker. Master Hugh finds himself in an impossible position. His previous inspections of Master Edmund's bakery, all of which resulted in clean compliance reports, now appear to document either gross incompetence or active collusion in the fraud scheme. The crowd's anger is turning toward him as rapidly as toward the baker, with demands for explanations of how such systematic violations could escape official detection for so long. The immediate consequences of the exposure extend far beyond Master Edmund's individual business. Other bakers in the marketplace, recognizing that the fraud techniques being revealed are widely used throughout the industry, begin to panic about their own exposure to similar scrutiny. Several close their stalls and disappear into side streets, abandoning their day's production rather than risk public inspection of their own practices. Customers who have purchased bread from Master Edmund demand immediate refunds, but the financial impact extends beyond simple reimbursement. Years of fraudulent sales have created a scale of potential liability that could bankrupt not only the individual baker, but several other merchants whose businesses depend on the same deceptive practices. The crowd's demands for justice threaten to trigger a broader collapse of commercial relationships throughout the marketplace. As the afternoon progresses and the full scope of the fraud network becomes apparent, you realize that Will's simple measurement error has triggered the unraveling of an entire underground economy. The sophisticated system of regulatory evasion that allowed multiple merchants to increase profits while technically complying with legal requirements has collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny, revealing the fundamental inadequacy of medieval commercial regulation. The chaos spreading through the marketplace represents more than the exposure of individual criminal behavior. It demonstrates the inherent instability of any regulatory system that creates opportunities for systematic evasion while depending on voluntary compliance and superficial enforcement. When fraud becomes so sophisticated and widespread that it constitutes normal business practice, any serious attempt at detection threatens to destroy the entire commercial framework that legitimate and illegitimate merchants share. Master Edmund's downfall, triggered by an apprentice's innocent mistake, illustrates the precarious foundation of medieval commercial regulation. The very complexity that was supposed to prevent fraud has instead created opportunities for sophisticated deception that exceed the detection capabilities of any practical enforcement system. When the system finally collapses, it takes down not only the guilty but also the regulatory framework that was supposed to protect honest merchants and customers alike. The pre-dawn darkness shrouds the marketplace of Winchester as you witness the careful choreography of medieval economic warfare, where the arrival of each merchant represents not merely the pursuit of profit, but the assertion of ancient territorial rights that have been contested for generations. Today's market day will see the collision of two powerful forces: the established merchant guild, whose members have controlled prime trading locations for over a century, and the increasingly assertive craft guilds, whose artisans demand recognition as equals in the complex hierarchy of medieval commerce. Master William de Clare, alderman of the Merchant Guild, arrives with the measured dignity of a man accustomed to unchallenged authority. His richly appointed cart, pulled by two well-fed horses and accompanied by 3 apprentices, stakes out the traditional position near the market cross, the prime location that grants maximum visibility to potential customers and symbolic dominance over the entire commercial proceedings. The goods he displays represent the apex of medieval international trade: fine woolens from Flanders, silk ribbons from distant Italian cities, spices that have travelled the length of Europe from Mediterranean ports, and silver jewellery crafted by artisans whose skills command premium prices throughout the kingdom. The Merchant Guild's control of this prime territory rests on privileges granted by royal charter, purchased at considerable expense and defended through decades of legal and economic warfare against competitors who lack similar recognition. Master William's right to this location is not merely commercial but quasi-governmental, carrying with it responsibilities for maintaining market order, collecting certain royal taxes, and mediating disputes between merchants whose social status places them below the guild's elevated ranks. As Master William arranges his display with practiced efficiency, you observe the subtle mechanisms through which economic privilege reinforces itself in medieval commercial life. His prominent position attracts the attention of early arriving customers who assume that prime locations indicate superior quality and fair dealing. His expensive goods establish him as a merchant of substance, capable of extending credit and honoring commitments over extended periods. His association with the Merchant Guild provides implicit guarantees of reliability that reduce customer concerns about fraud or dispute resolution. But this morning's market will not proceed according to the established patterns that have governed Winchester's commerce for generations. As the sky begins to lighten, a procession of craft workers approaches the marketplace with obvious intent to challenge the traditional hierarchy that has relegated them to peripheral locations and secondary status. Leading this group is Master Robert the goldsmith, whose skills in working precious metals have made him wealthy enough to purchase goods that rival those of any merchant, but whose guild membership has never granted him access to the prime trading, positions reserved for the merchant elite. Master Robert's arrival signals a carefully planned confrontation that has been months in the making. The Goldsmiths Guild, along with allied craft organizations representing carpenters, masons, and textile workers, has petitioned the town authorities for recognition as equals to the Merchant Guild in all matters pertaining to marketplace privileges and commercial governance. Their petition, supported by detailed legal arguments and backed by substantial financial resources, challenges the fundamental assumptions that have structured medieval urban commerce since the Norman conquest. The Craft Guild's challenge rests on economic arguments that threaten the theoretical foundations of merchant privilege. Master Robert and his allies point out that their products represent local manufacture that adds value to imported raw materials, creating wealth within the community rather than simply redistributing profits from distant trade. They argue that their permanent residence in Winchester gives them stronger claims to local commercial privileges than travelling merchants who may appear only for major market days or seasonal fairs. More provocatively, the Craft Guilds question whether the Merchant Guild's Royal Charter, granted decades earlier under different economic conditions, should continue to provide exclusive rights that prevent other legitimate traders from competing for prime market locations. Their legal position, while complex, essentially argues that commercial privileges should reflect current economic contributions rather than historical precedent and political connections. Master William recognizes the threat immediately. The Craft Guild's challenge represents more than a dispute over market stalls. It threatens the entire system of commercial hierarchy that has provided the foundation for merchant wealth and political influence. If craft workers gain equal access to prime trading locations, they will compete directly with established merchants for the most profitable customers. If they achieve recognition as commercial equals, they will demand participation in the governance structures that currently remain under merchant control. The confrontation begins with a seemingly minor disagreement over the placement of a goldsmithsy stall. Master Robert approaches a location immediately adjacent to Master William's traditional position, an area that has always been considered part of the Merchant Guild's exclusive territory. He begins setting up his display of rings, bracelets, and decorative metalwork, goods whose obvious quality and substantial value challenge any suggestion that craft workers deal only in inferior products suitable for lower-class customers. Master William's initial response follows established protocols for defending territorial privileges. He approaches Master Robert with formal politeness, explaining that the disputed location has been reserved for Merchant Guild members through ancient custom and royal charter. He suggests that suitable space remains available in the areas traditionally allocated to craft workers and offers to help locate an appropriate alternative site that would not conflict with established commercial arrangements. Master Robert's response reveals the calculated nature of this confrontation. Rather than accepting the suggested alternative or arguing about the specific location, he challenges the fundamental basis of Master William's authority. "By what right," he asks, in a voice loud enough for nearby merchants to hear, "does your guild claim exclusive control over public marketplace locations that should be available to all legitimate traders?" His question transforms a simple territorial dispute into a public debate about the nature of commercial privilege and municipal governance. The legal issues involved prove far more complex than either man initially anticipated. The merchant guild's royal charter grants specific privileges but does not explicitly exclude other traders from particular market locations. The town's municipal regulations establish procedures for allocating market stalls but do not clearly define the relationship between royal charters and local authority. Most problematically, recent economic changes have created situations that existing legal frameworks simply did not anticipate. The craft guilds' increasing wealth and political influence have given them resources to challenge merchant dominance in ways that would have been impossible a generation earlier. Master Robert's goldsmith workshop employs more local residents than many merchant operations, generates substantial tax revenues for municipal authorities, and produces goods that attract customers from surrounding regions. His economic contributions to the community equal or exceed those of many traditional merchants, yet his guild membership provides none of the commercial privileges that merchant status automatically confers. As the morning progresses and more merchants arrive to set up their stalls, the dispute between Master William and Master Robert begins attracting supporters from both sides. Merchant guild members rally around their traditional privileges, arguing that royal charters represent sacred compacts that cannot be altered by local politics or economic pressure. They point out that merchant capital finances the long-distance trade that brings prosperity to the entire region, and that undermining merchant privileges would ultimately harm everyone who benefits from commercial activity. The craft guild supporters counter with arguments about fairness, local economic development, and the changing nature of medieval commerce. They observe that traditional merchant activities increasingly depend on local manufacturing, making the distinction between traders and producers less meaningful than historical precedent suggests. They argue that community prosperity requires encouraging all forms of economic activity rather than protecting the exclusive privileges of a single commercial class. The territorial dispute escalates when other craft workers begin claiming locations throughout the marketplace without seeking permission from the merchant guild or municipal authorities. The Carpenters Guild sets up a display of finished furniture directly across from the area traditionally reserved for imported goods. The Textile Workers Guild spreads bolts of locally woven cloth in locations where customers would normally expect to find expensive foreign fabrics. The Masons Guild exhibits carved stonework in the central market area, usually dominated by luxury trade goods. Each of these incursions represents a calculated challenge to the spatial organization that has reinforced commercial hierarchy for generations. By claiming prime locations and displaying high-quality goods, the craft guilds are asserting not only their right to equal treatment but their capacity to compete successfully with established merchants on any terms. The traditional segregation that kept different types of traders in separate areas, reinforcing assumptions about quality and status, is breaking down under pressure from artisans who refuse to accept subordinate positions. Master William finds himself fighting a battle on multiple fronts as the territorial challenges multiply throughout the marketplace. Each attempt to reassert merchant guild authority over specific locations triggers new confrontations with craft workers who question the legal basis for such claims. His appeals to traditional practice and royal charter meet increasingly sophisticated legal arguments from craft guild representatives who have clearly prepared for this confrontation with careful research and strategic planning. The crisis deepens when municipal authorities arrive to investigate the disturbances, only to discover that the legal framework governing marketplace organization provides no clear guidance for resolving the territorial disputes. The Royal Charter, granting privileges to the Merchant Guild, does not specifically address the rights of other guilds. The municipal regulations establishing market procedures assume cooperation between different commercial groups rather than open conflict over fundamental principles. Town officials find themselves caught between competing legal claims and powerful economic interests. Supporting the merchant guild's traditional privileges risks alienating the increasingly important craft workers whose local economic contributions have become essential to municipal prosperity. Backing the craft guild's challenge to established arrangements threatens to undermine the entire system of royal charters and traditional commercial law that provides the foundation for regional trade relationships. As tensions continue to build, throughout the morning you realize that this territorial dispute represents far more than a disagreement about market stall locations. The confrontation between Master William and Master Robert has exposed fundamental contradictions in the economic and legal structures that govern medieval commercial life. The old system of merchant privilege, designed for an economy based primarily on long-distance trade in luxury goods, is proving inadequate for a more complex commercial environment where local production and foreign trade intersect in increasingly sophisticated ways. The guild wars beginning to unfold in Winchester Marketplace will ultimately force a complete reconsideration of how medieval communities organize and regulate their economic life. But first, the immediate territorial disputes must be resolved through methods that will test the limits of both legal authority and economic power in ways that no one can fully anticipate. The noon sun beats down mercilessly upon Winchester Marketplace as the territorial disputes of the morning evolve into something far more serious, a systematic economic war between competing guilds that threatens to paralyze the entire commercial infrastructure of the region. You observe from the relative safety of a brewery stall as Master William de Clare attempts to marshal the resources of the Merchant Guild against what has become a coordinated assault on their traditional privileges by virtually every craft organization in the area. The Craft Guild's strategy reveals sophisticated understanding of the economic vulnerabilities that lie beneath the Merchant Guild's apparent dominance. Rather than simply competing for prime market locations, they have begun implementing a boycott system that targets the supply chains upon which merchant operations depend. Master Robert the Goldsmith leads a coalition that includes not only the obvious manufacturing guilds but also the seemingly mundane organizations that provide essential support services, the Carters Guild that transports goods, the Porters Guild that handles loading and unloading, and even the Innkeepers Guild that provides lodging for traveling merchants. The first casualties of this economic warfare appear in the deteriorating quality of services available to merchant guild members. Master William discovers that his usual carter has suddenly become unavailable for transporting goods from the docks claimed by prior commitments to craft guild members that never existed before this morning. The porters who normally handle his heavy merchandise have developed mysterious back ailments that prevent them from working for anyone associated with the Merchant Guild. Even the inn where his business associates traditionally lodge has experienced an unexpected shortage of rooms, apparently reserved for artisans attending a previously unannounced craft guild conference. These service disruptions might seem like minor inconveniences, but they strike at the operational heart of merchant operations that depend on complex logistics to function effectively. Medieval commerce requires precise coordination between multiple service providers, and the loss of reliable partners can quickly cascade into major operational failures. Master William's expensive imports become worthless if he cannot transport them to market, display them effectively, or store them safely overnight. The Craft Guild's boycott strategy proves particularly effective because it exploits the social relationships that underlie medieval economic activity. Most service providers maintain connections to multiple guilds through family relationships, apprenticeship histories, or mutual business interests. When these networks mobilize against the Merchant Guild, they create social pressure that proves more powerful than purely economic incentives. Master William attempts to counter this pressure by offering premium payments for services that were previously available at standard rates. His willingness to pay 20% above normal fees for cartage initially appears to solve his transportation problems, but it actually accelerates the economic warfare by demonstrating the merchant guild's vulnerability to coordinated pressure. Other craft guild members quickly realize that they can extract similar premium payments by creating artificial scarcities in their own service areas. The situation deteriorates further when the craft guilds begin targeting the customer relationships that form the foundation of merchant prosperity. Master Robert organizes what amounts to a customer education campaign designed to convince buyers that locally produced goods offer superior value compared to expensive imports. Goldsmiths, textile workers, and furniture makers collaborate on demonstrations that highlight the quality and craftsmanship of local production, while questioning the markup practices that allow merchants to profit from simply transporting goods produced elsewhere. These customer education efforts prove remarkably effective because they address genuine concerns that have been building among Winchester's more prosperous residents. Many customers have suspected that merchant markup policies result in prices that bear little relationship to actual costs or quality. The Craft Guild's alternative offerings provide direct comparison shopping opportunities that reveal the substantial price advantages available from local producers. Master William watches in growing alarm as long-time customers examine locally produced alternatives to his imported goods with obvious interest. A wool merchant's wife who has purchased expensive Flemish cloth from him for years spends an hour discussing prices and quality with local textile workers whose products cost significantly less while meeting her practical needs equally well. A goldsmith demonstrates jewelry techniques to customers who have never considered that local artisans might produce work comparable to expensive imports from London or continental Europe. The economic pressure intensifies when the craft guilds begin offering direct credit arrangements that compete with the financing services that have provided merchant guilds with competitive advantages for generations. Traditional medieval commerce operates largely on credit, with merchants serving as financial intermediaries who can afford to extend payment terms to customers while maintaining relationships with distant suppliers. This financial role has allowed merchants to charge premium prices that reflect not only the cost of goods, but also the value of credit and risk management services. Master Robert's coalition challenges this financial dominance by pooling the resources of multiple craft guilds to offer competitive credit terms directly to customers. The Goldsmiths Guild provides financing for expensive purchases, the Textile Workers Guild offers payment plans for clothing and household goods, and the Furniture Makers Guild extends credit for major home improvement projects. These arrangements eliminate the merchant intermediary while providing customers with comparable financing at lower total costs. The credit competition reveals fundamental changes in the economic structure of medieval towns that traditional merchant privileges have failed to acknowledge. The craft guild's increasing prosperity has given them financial resources that rival those of established merchants, while their permanent local residence provides better security for credit arrangements than traveling merchants can offer. Customers who default on payments to local artisans face immediate social and economic consequences within their own community, making craft guild credit actually safer than merchant financing in many circumstances. Master William's attempts to respond to this financial competition expose the limitations of traditional merchant advantages in the changing economic environment. His appeals to royal charter privileges carry little weight with customers who care more about prices and terms than historical precedent. His threats to withdraw from the Winchester market entirely backfire when craft guild representatives point out that local production can replace most imported goods without significant loss to the community. The crisis reaches a turning point when the craft guilds achieve something that seemed impossible just hours earlier. They begin attracting customers who represent the social elite that has traditionally provided the core market for expensive merchant goods. Lady Margaret de Vere, whose household represents one of the most prestigious customers in the region, makes a highly visible purchase of locally produced silk ribbons that cost half what she normally pays for comparable imported items. Her purchase decision, motivated primarily by economic rather than political considerations, sends shockwaves through both merchant and craft guild ranks. If the highest status customers begin preferring local production over expensive imports, the entire rationale for merchant privileges collapses. The social prestige that has justified premium prices for foreign goods depends on the assumption that local production cannot match the quality and sophistication available through international trade. Lady Margaret's public endorsement of craft guild products triggers a cascade of similar decisions by other high-status customers who have been quietly questioning whether expensive imports provide sufficient value to justify their premium prices. The social dynamics that traditionally reinforced merchant dominance begin working in favor of local artisans whose products receive validation from the community's most influential consumers. Master William recognizes that the economic warfare has reached a point where traditional merchant advantages no longer provide adequate competitive protection. The royal charter that guarantees his guild's privileges cannot force customers to purchase expensive imports when comparable local alternatives cost significantly less. The prime market locations that symbolize merchant dominance become meaningless when customers actively seek out craft guild stalls in search of better value. The Merchant Guild's response to this crisis reveals both the resources available to established commercial elites and the limitations of purely defensive strategies in rapidly changing economic environments. Master William calls an emergency meeting of guild leadership to coordinate a counterattack against the Craft Guild's economic campaign, but the meeting exposes deep divisions within merchant ranks about how to respond to the unprecedented challenge to their authority. Some merchant guild members advocate aggressive retaliation, including appeals to royal authorities for enforcement of charter privileges and legal action against craft guilds that violate established commercial protocols. Others argue for accommodation, suggesting that cooperation with successful artisans might prove more profitable than defending exclusive privileges that customers no longer value. A third faction proposes economic concessions designed to undercut craft guild pricing, while maintaining merchant control over premium market segments. These strategic debates consume valuable time while the craft guilds continue expanding their economic offensive. Each hour of merchant indecision allows artisan competitors to consolidate gains with customers who might have remained loyal under different circumstances. The opportunity costs of prolonged guild warfare begin mounting for both sides, but the Craft Guild's local base provides them with advantages in sustaining extended economic conflict. As the afternoon progresses, you realize that the territorial disputes that began this morning have evolved into a comprehensive challenge to the entire structure of medieval commercial hierarchy. The economics of exclusion that have maintained merchant privileges for generations are proving inadequate against artisan competitors who combine superior local knowledge, competitive pricing, and community social networks that transcend traditional guild boundaries. The question facing both sides is no longer whether change will occur, but whether that change can be managed through negotiation and compromise, or will require the complete destruction of existing commercial relationships. The answer will depend on events that are already beginning to unfold as the economic warfare enters its most dangerous phase. The afternoon shadows stretch across Winchester Marketplace as what began as a territorial dispute between commercial guilds transforms into something approaching civil warfare, complete with strategic alliances, coordinated attacks, and the kind of systematic violence that reveals how thoroughly economic competition can undermine the social bonds that normally maintain medieval community stability. You take shelter behind a sturdy ale barrel as the latest escalation unfolds, the arrival of the Weavers' Guild reinforcements, summoned from neighboring towns and armed with both legal documents and considerably less legal cudgels, Master William declares desperate morning appeal to guild networks throughout the region has produced results that exceed his expectations in scope, while falling short of his hopes for decisive advantage. The merchant reinforcements streaming into Winchester include not only established traders, but also their hired retainers, apprentices released from normal duties for emergency guild service, and various hangers-on whose loyalty can be purchased for the price of a good meal and the promise of excitement. This hastily assembled force brings both manpower and the kind of unpredictable energy that transforms commercial disputes into community-wide chaos. The craft guilds, however, have not been idle during Master William's recruitment efforts. Master Robert the Goldsmith has achieved something unprecedented in medieval commercial history, a unified command structure that coordinates the activities of traditionally independent artisan organizations under a single strategic plan. The Carpenters Guild provides defensive expertise, the Masons Guild contributes knowledge of urban warfare tactics, and the Blacksmiths Guild supplies weapons that are officially described as tools, but serve more martial purposes when circumstances require. The transformation of economic competition into potential violence reflects deeper tensions that have been building within medieval urban society for generations. The traditional guild system, designed to prevent exactly this kind of destructive conflict, has proved inadequate for managing the economic pressures created by increasing prosperity, changing trade patterns, and the social mobility that threatens established hierarchies. When peaceful competition fails to resolve resource allocation disputes, medieval communities possess few institutional mechanisms for preventing escalation to more direct forms of conflict. Master William's strategy for the afternoon assault reveals both sophisticated planning and fundamental misunderstanding of the forces he has unleashed. His merchant coalition intends to reclaim disputed territory through a combination of legal pressure and physical intimidation, establishing merchant control over prime market locations while forcing craft guilds back into their traditional subordinate positions. The plan assumes that superior financial resources and royal charter privileges will provide decisive advantages in any direct confrontation. The first phase of this strategy unfolds when Master William leads a formal procession of merchant guild members to the disputed area near the market cross, accompanied by a town clerk carrying official documents that supposedly confirm merchant rights to exclusive use of prime trading locations. The procession moves with ceremonial dignity designed to emphasize the legal authority behind merchant claims, while demonstrating the social solidarity that supposedly makes their position unassailable. Master Robert's response reveals careful preparation and tactical sophistication that suggests military advice from sources that remain mysteriously unidentified. Rather than meeting the merchant procession directly, the craft guilds implement a dispersal strategy that forces their opponents to confront multiple small groups scattered throughout the marketplace rather than a single, concentrated force. Each craft guild maintains its established position while sending representatives to support allies under direct pressure, creating a defensive network that cannot be broken through conventional assault tactics. The legal phase of the confrontation proves entirely inadequate for resolving the underlying disputes. The town clerk's reading of merchant charter privileges draws jeers and legal counter-arguments from craft guild representatives who have obviously consulted with trained lawyers. Their documentation challenges not only the specific interpretation of merchant rights, but the continuing validity of royal charters granted under economic conditions that no longer exist. The craft guild's legal position rests on sophisticated arguments about changed circumstances, community welfare, and the relationship between royal authority and local governance. They point out that merchant charters were granted to encourage trade development that has now been achieved, making continued exclusive privileges unnecessary for their original purpose. They argue that current economic conditions require broader participation in commercial governance to maintain community prosperity and social stability. More provocatively, the craft guilds question whether royal charters can legitimately grant exclusive rights to public marketplace areas that belong to the community as a whole rather than to any particular commercial interest. Their legal arguments, while technically complex, essentially assert that merchant privileges represent illegitimate appropriation of community resources for private benefit, rather than legitimate grants of authority for public purposes. The failure of legal arguments to produce clear resolution creates the opening for physical confrontation that both sides have been anticipating and preparing for throughout the day. The first violence erupts when a merchant apprentice attempts to dismantle a goldsmith's stall in the disputed territory near the market cross, claiming authority under Master William's interpretation of charter privileges. His action triggers immediate retaliation from craft guild members who have been waiting for exactly this kind of provocation. The initial scuffle spreads rapidly as supporters from both sides rush to assist their allies, transforming a minor disagreement about stall placement into a general melee that engulfs a significant portion of the marketplace. Wooden stalls collapse under the pressure of fighting bodies, merchandise scatters across muddy ground, and customers flee in all directions while trying to protect their purchases from the expanding chaos. The violence reveals both the limitations and the surprising effectiveness of medieval crowd control techniques. The combatants possess few actual weapons beyond tools and improvised clubs, but their numbers and passion create a level of destruction that threatens the entire market infrastructure. Merchant guild members, accustomed to commercial competition but inexperienced in physical confrontation, discover that their financial advantages provide little protection against artisans whose daily work has given them superior strength and familiarity with potentially dangerous tools. Master William's attempt to rally his forces around the symbolic authority of the market cross proves tactically disastrous. The concentration of merchant guild members in a single location makes them vulnerable to coordinated attacks from multiple craft guilds whose dispersed positioning allows them to strike from several directions simultaneously. The carpenter's expertise in structural demolition proves particularly effective when applied to the temporary wooden platforms that elevated merchant displays above the general market level. The turning point comes when the blacksmith's guild implements what amounts to a scorched earth strategy, systematically destroying the infrastructure that supports market operations rather than simply competing for control over it. Their technical knowledge of metal work allows them to disable the scales, weights, and measuring devices that provide the foundation for regulated commerce, creating chaos that affects all market participants regardless of guild affiliation. For the quest, destruction of measuring equipment represents more than tactical vandalism. It strikes at the heart of the regulatory system that supposedly prevents the kind of commercial fraud and dispute that led to this confrontation. Without reliable weights and measures, customers cannot verify the fairness of any transactions. Merchants cannot demonstrate compliance with legal requirements, and the entire framework of commercial law becomes meaningless. Master Robert's decision to target the measurement infrastructure reveals strategic thinking that extends beyond immediate territorial disputes to fundamental questions about commercial governance. By destroying the tools of regulation, the craft guilds force a complete reconsideration of how market relationships should be organized and controlled. Their action essentially argues that the current regulatory system serves merchant interest, rather than community welfare, and that genuine reform requires starting over with different assumptions about commercial fairness. The escalating destruction finally triggers intervention from municipal authorities who have been reluctant to take sides in what initially appeared to be a private commercial dispute. The arrival of town guards, accompanied by officials with authority to impose emergency restrictions on market activities, forces both sides to choose between continued violence and negotiated settlement of their differences. The intervention comes too late to prevent significant damage to both market, infrastructure, and community relationships. Several stalls have been completely destroyed, merchandise worth substantial sums has been lost or damaged, and multiple participants have suffered injuries that will affect their ability to work for weeks or months. More seriously, the trust, relationships that underlie medieval commercial activity have been severely damaged by the day's violence. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation reveals the true costs of guild warfare that extend far beyond the physical destruction visible. In the marketplace, customer confidence in market safety and fairness has been shaken by witnessing the collapse of commercial order into violence. Merchant relationships with suppliers and customers have been complicated by questions about guild loyalties and political positions. Most seriously, the regulatory framework that supposedly maintains commercial stability has been exposed as inadequate for managing the economic pressures that created this crisis. Master William and Master Robert, exhausted by the day's conflicts and sobered by their consequences, faced the sobering reality that their warfare has achieved none of its intended objectives while creating new problems that will take years to resolve. The territorial disputes that seemed so important in the morning have been overshadowed by fundamental questions about the organization of medieval commercial life that cannot be answered through violence or legal technicalities. The municipal authorities' emergency restrictions on market activities provide temporary stability while forcing all parties to consider whether the traditional guild system can be reformed to prevent similar conflicts, or whether entirely new approaches to commercial governance must be developed. The answer will determine not only the future of Winchester's marketplace, but the broader evolution of medieval urban economic life. As evening approaches and the combatants begin the grim task of assessing damage and treating injuries, you realize that the guild wars represent more than commercial competition gone wrong. They reveal fundamental contradictions in medieval economic institutions that have been masked by prosperity and tradition, but can no longer be ignored when changing circumstances create new pressures and possibilities. The battle for the markets' soul will continue in courtrooms and council chambers rather than marketplace streets, but the questions raised by today's violence will challenge medieval communities throughout Europe as they struggle to adapt ancient institutions to the demands of an increasingly complex commercial world. You step carefully through the pre-dawn darkness of a medieval marketplace, guided only by flickering torchlight and the overwhelming sensory assault that announces your arrival at one of history's most ambitious experiments in urban commerce. A weekly market that attempts to concentrate hundreds of merchants, thousands of customers, and countless animals into a space originally designed for a fraction of that activity. The year is 1348, and you are about to witness how the complete absence of anything resembling modern sanitation infrastructure transforms medieval market days into public health catastrophes that somehow persist because the economic benefits of concentrated commerce outweigh the physical misery of participating in it. The first indication of the sanitary nightmare that awaits comes not through sight, but through the overwhelming assault on your sense of smell. Even in the relative coolness of early morning, before the day's activities have begun in earnest, the marketplace reeks with the accumulated waste of previous market days that has never been properly removed. Human waste mingles with animal dung, rotting food scraps, and the peculiar stench of medieval industry. Tanning chemicals, metalworking fumes, and the rancid fat used in countless manufacturing processes. Master Geoffrey, the market clerk, whose responsibility for maintaining marketplace order extends theoretically to sanitation, but practically to very little beyond collecting fees, greets the dawn by picking his way through obstacles that would challenge a military engineer. The ground beneath your feet consists not of solid earth, but of a constantly shifting mixture of mud, animal waste, food scraps, and human refuse that has been churned into a substance resembling nothing so much as the primordial ooze from which Medieval scholars imagined life itself had emerged. The absence of any systematic waste removal reflects not mere negligence but the complete lack of institutional mechanisms for managing the sanitary consequences of concentrated economic activity. Medieval towns possess rudimentary systems for disposing of household waste, usually involving throwing it into the nearest river or designated dumping area outside town walls. But these systems prove entirely inadequate for handling the vastly greater quantities of refuse generated by market days that concentrate the waste production of entire regions into single locations. Master Geoffrey's morning routine begins with the hopeless task of clearing pathways through the accumulated debris, using a wooden shovel to push aside the worst obstacles while knowing that his efforts will be overwhelmed within hours by the day's new contributions to the growing waste pile. His work reveals the archaeological layers of previous market days, vegetable scraps from last week's produce sales, buried beneath more recent additions, fragments of pottery and other manufactured goods that have been trampled into the general muck, and the bones and other remains of butchering operations that attract flies and other scavengers in numbers that defy description. The arrival of the first merchants compounds the sanitation problems exponentially as their animals add immediately to the waste accumulation while their activities begin the process of churning the ground into an even more treacherous surface. Master Thomas the cattle dealer brings with him a dozen head of livestock whose digestive systems operate with clockwork regularity regardless of their location, depositing fresh contributions to the waste pile at intervals that seem calculated to maximize the inconvenience of human activities. The cattle, sheep, pigs and horses that serve as both merchandise and transportation create waste management challenges that exceed the capabilities of any medieval administrative system. A single cow produces approximately 40 pounds of manure per day, meaning that Master Thomas's modest herd contributes nearly 500 pounds of fresh waste to the marketplace before the morning activities have properly begun. Multiply this by the dozens of animal dealers who participate in typical market days, and the scale of the sanitation challenge becomes apparent. But animal waste, however abundant and aromatic, represents only one component of the comprehensive assault on medieval sanitary sensibilities. The human waste produced by market participants creates problems that are both more immediate and more dangerous to public health. Medieval people, lacking access to anything resembling modern toilet facilities, address their biological needs through a combination of designated areas, private arrangements, and simple expedients that treats the entire marketplace as a potential latrine. The officially designated waste areas, euphemistically called necessaries in contemporary documents, consist of simple pits dug at the periphery of the market area and covered with rough wooden structures that provide minimal privacy and no protection against the elements. These facilities, intended to serve hundreds of daily users, quickly become overwhelmed by demand while contributing their own distinctive aromas to the marketplace atmosphere. The wooden covers warp and crack under constant use, the pits overflow during heavy rains, and the entire system requires maintenance that no one has clear responsibility for providing. Master Geoffrey's theoretical authority over marketplace sanitation extends to ensuring that the necessaries remain functional, but his practical capabilities fall far short of the theoretical requirements. He lacks both the resources and the technical knowledge necessary for maintaining waste disposal systems, while the merchants and customers who create the problems view sanitation as someone else's responsibility. The result is a classic example of what modern economists would recognize as a tragedy of the commons, where individual rational behavior produces collectively irrational outcomes. The inadequacy of official waste disposal facilities forces market participants to devise their own solutions with predictable consequences for public health and general sanitary conditions. Private waste disposal typically involves dumping refuse in whatever location seems convenient at the moment, behind stalls, in temporarily unoccupied areas, or simply wherever the dumper believes detection is unlikely. These improvised disposal sites multiply throughout the marketplace, creating a constantly shifting geography of filth that makes navigation increasingly hazardous as the day progresses. The lack of running water compounds every aspect of the sanitation crisis by making even basic hygiene impossible for market participants. Medieval markets operate without access to clean water for washing hands, cleaning tools, or maintaining food preparation areas. The communal wells that serve surrounding communities cannot support the additional demand created by market day activities, while the local rivers and streams that might provide washing facilities quickly become contaminated by the runoff from marketplace activities. Master Edmund the baker, whose trade requires at least minimal attention to cleanliness for producing edible products, illustrates the impossible sanitary conditions under which medieval commerce operates. His bread-making process begins with flour that has been stored in conditions that expose it to rodent contamination, dust, and moisture that promotes mold growth. His water comes from sources that would be considered dangerously polluted by any modern standard. His work surfaces, supposedly cleaned between uses, receive at best a cursory wiping with cloths that have not been properly washed in weeks. The food preparation and sales that constitute major components of market day commerce operate under sanitary conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors, while somehow producing products that medieval people consider safe for consumption. Meat sellers display their wares on wooden tables that have absorbed years of blood and other organic matter, creating breeding grounds for bacteria that medieval people could not identify but certainly experienced through frequent food poisoning and digestive ailments. Master Peter, the butcher's stall, exemplifies the intersection of commercial necessity and sanitary impossibility that characterizes medieval food commerce. His display of fresh meat attracts clouds of flies that no amount of brushing can disperse, while the blood and other liquids that drain from his products create puddles that mix with the general marketplace muck. His cutting tools, cleaned only with water of questionable purity, transfer contamination between different cuts of meat, while his scales accumulate organic matter that provides ideal conditions for bacterial growth. The dairy products sold by various farmers' wives face even greater sanitary challenges, since milk and cheese require refrigeration that does not exist, and protection from contamination that cannot be provided under marketplace conditions. Milk sours rapidly in summer heat while accumulating dust, insects, and other foreign matter. Cheese develops mold and bacterial contamination that medieval people sometimes mistake for normal aging processes. Butter melts and rancidifies while attracting scavengers whose presence indicates the advanced state of decomposition. The textile and manufactured goods merchants face different but equally serious sanitation challenges as their products absorb the odors and contamination that pervade the marketplace atmosphere. Cloth exposed to the marketplace environment for entire days becomes impregnated with smells that may never completely disappear, while leather goods and other organic materials provide breeding grounds for insects and other pests that customers inadvertently purchase along with their intended merchandise. Master Robert the wool merchant attempts to protect his expensive fabrics by covering them with additional cloth barriers, but these protective measures prove inadequate against the comprehensive assault of medieval marketplace conditions. The dust kicked up by human and animal traffic settles on everything, while the moisture from various sources creates conditions that promote mold growth and other forms of deterioration. His finest woolens, imported at considerable expense from distant manufacturing centers, suffer damage from marketplace exposure that reduces their value and threatens his profit margins. The pottery and metalwork merchants face the constant challenge of keeping their goods clean enough to be attractive. to customers while operating in an environment that seems designed to dirty everything it touches. Clay vessels accumulate layers of grime that obscure their original appearance, while metal goods develop surface contamination that customers associate with inferior quality. The merchants' attempts to clean their merchandise often prove futile, since the water available for cleaning is itself contaminated and the cloths used for wiping are perpetually dirty. As the morning progresses and market activity intensifies, you begin to understand how medieval people could tolerate sanitary conditions that seem unbearable to modern sensibilities. The economic opportunities provided by concentrated commerce create incentives that outweigh the physical discomfort of participating in grossly unsanitary activities. Merchants accept the fouling of their goods and the assault on their senses, because market days provide access to customers and profits that justify temporary suffering. Customers endure unpleasant conditions because markets offer goods and services that are unavailable elsewhere. The normalization of extreme unsanitary conditions reflects broader patterns in medieval life, where survival often requires accepting circumstances that would be considered intolerable under different economic conditions. People who live constantly on the edge of subsistence cannot afford the luxury of refusing economic opportunities because of aesthetic or health concerns. The marketplace sanitation nightmare persists because the alternatives, reduced commerce, limited economic opportunities, continued rural isolation, seem worse than the immediate discomfort of participating in unsanitary but profitable activities. Yet even medieval tolerance for unpleasant conditions has limits, and the sanitation problems that begin each market day grow progressively worse as commercial activities intensify and larger numbers of people and animals concentrate in increasingly fouled spaces. The morning's manageable unpleasantness will evolve into afternoon conditions that challenge even medieval people's capacity for enduring sensory assault and health hazards. By midday, the sanitation nightmare that began as merely unpleasant morning conditions has evolved into a comprehensive assault on human health and dignity that transforms the marketplace into something resembling a medieval vision of purgatory, complete with overwhelming stenches, dangerous obstacles, and the kind of systematic suffering that supposedly purifies souls through physical torment. You watch in fascination and horror as hundreds of people continue conducting commercial business under conditions that would challenge the survival instincts of hardy scavengers, yet somehow persist because the economic imperatives of medieval life make even unbearable conditions preferable to the alternatives. The intensification of sanitary problems follows predictable patterns that compound throughout the day as increasing numbers of people and animals contribute to waste accumulation, while the lack of any systematic cleanup efforts allows contamination to spread and concentrate in ever more dangerous concentrations. Master Geoffrey, the market clerk, whose morning attempts at waste management now seem pathetically inadequate, has abandoned any pretense of maintaining sanitary order and instead focuses on the more achievable goal of collecting fees from merchants, who are too busy surviving the conditions to question his priorities. The ground conditions that seemed challenging in early morning have deteriorated into something approaching liquid horror, with the accumulated waste of hundreds of humans and dozens of animals churned into a substance that defies easy description. The mixture of mud, dung, food scraps, and various organic liquids has achieved a consistency that makes walking treacherous and standing still dangerous, as the unstable surface threatens to swallow unwary travelers while releasing noxious gases with each step. Master Thomas, the cattle dealer, whose animals contributed substantially to the morning's waste accumulation, now faces the consequence of operating in an environment that threatens the health of his livestock as much as his customers. His cattle, forced to stand in conditions that violate every principle of animal husbandry, develop hoof problems and digestive ailments that reduce their market value while creating additional sanitary hazards. The sick animals produce waste that is more liquid and aromatic than normal, contributing to the general deterioration while advertising their compromised condition to potential buyers. The human waste situation has progressed beyond the capacity of the inadequate facilities to contain, creating a crisis that affects every aspect of market operations. The official necessaries, overwhelmed by demand and lacking any maintenance, have begun overflowing their boundaries and contaminating surrounding areas. The result is an expanding zone of contamination that forces people to venture ever farther from the market center to find usable facilities, creating traffic patterns that spread pollution throughout the entire commercial area. The failure of official waste management forces market participants to adopt increasingly desperate expedients that compound the sanitary crisis while revealing the complete breakdown of community cooperation under extreme stress. Private waste disposal, originally confined to discrete locations behind stalls and in temporarily unoccupied areas, now occurs wherever immediate necessity demands, without regard for the consequences to other market participants or the overall sanitary environment. Master Edmund the baker, whose trade requires maintaining at least minimal standards of cleanliness, finds himself trapped between impossible sanitary conditions and customer expectations that he continue producing edible bread. His work area, supposedly protected by canvas barriers and elevated wooden platforms, has been compromised by contamination that seeps through every attempted barrier. The flour that forms the foundation of his trade becomes contaminated with dust, moisture, and organic matter that would render it unsuitable for consumption under any reasonable sanitary standard. The water situation has deteriorated from merely questionable to actively dangerous as the various contamination sources spread throughout the available supply. The communal wells that serve the marketplace have become polluted by surface runoff that carries waste products directly into the water sources. The result is water that poses immediate health risks to anyone who consumes it, yet remains the only liquid available for drinking, cooking, and the minimal cleaning that market operations require. Master Peter the butcher faces perhaps the most serious sanitary challenges as his trade involves handling products that are particularly vulnerable to contamination, while operating under conditions that guarantee exposure to dangerous bacteria and other pathogens. His meat products, displayed on surfaces that cannot be properly cleaned and exposed to clouds of flies that transfer contamination between different items, represent serious health hazards that somehow continue to find willing customers. Meat cutting and preparation that occurs throughout the market area creates additional contamination sources as blood and other organic liquids drain into the general waste accumulation. The wooden cutting boards and tables used by various meat sellers become saturated with organic matter that provides ideal breeding conditions for bacteria and attracts scavengers whose presence indicates the advanced state of decomposition. Yet commercial necessity requires that these contaminated surfaces continue to be used for food preparation. The dairy products that seemed questionable in the morning have achieved states of decomposition that would normally indicate complete spoilage, yet continue to find customers who either cannot detect the deterioration or consider it acceptable under current market conditions. Milk has soured to the point of separation. Cheese has developed surface molds that extend throughout the product, and butter has achieved a liquid consistency that makes it difficult to distinguish from other organic liquids in the general marketplace. Accumulation. The textile merchants face their own version of the sanitation crisis as their expensive goods absorb contamination that threatens to make them unsaleable. Master Robert the Wool. Merchants' attempts to protect his valuable fabrics through covering and elevation have proved inadequate against the comprehensive assault of marketplace conditions. His finest woolens have absorbed odors that may prove permanent while developing stains from various sources that reduce their value and marketability. The pottery and metalwork vendors struggle with the impossible task of maintaining product cleanliness under conditions that contaminate everything they touch. clay vessels become encrusted with layers of organic matter that obscure their original appearance and raise questions about their suitability for food storage. Metal goods develop surface contamination that suggests inferior quality while actually reflecting the impossible sanitary conditions under which they are displayed and sold. The customer experience has evolved from merely unpleasant to actively dangerous as the deteriorating sanitary conditions create health hazards that affect everyone who ventures into the marketplace. Respiratory problems develop from breathing air laden with organic particles and noxious gases. Skin conditions result from contact with contaminated surfaces. Digestive ailments follow inevitably from consuming food and water that have been exposed to dangerous levels of contamination. Yet despite these mounting health hazards, commercial activity continues at levels that suggest either remarkable tolerance for extreme conditions or desperation that makes even dangerous circumstances preferable to economic alternatives. Customers continue examining merchandise, merchants persist in displaying their goods, and the basic transactions that drive medieval commerce proceed with determination that defies rational assessment of the risks involved. The social dynamics that normally govern marketplace behavior begin breaking down under the stress of extreme sanitary conditions. The courtesy and deference that usually characterize commercial relationships give way to more aggressive competition for access to slightly less contaminated areas. Customers become more demanding about product quality, while merchants become more defensive about criticism of goods that reflect environmental conditions beyond their control. Master Geoffrey's afternoon rounds reveal the complete breakdown of any pretense of sanitary management as he picks his way through obstacles that have multiplied and intensified since morning. His wooden shovel, originally intended for clearing pathways, now serves primarily as a walking stick that helps him maintain balance on increasingly treacherous surfaces. His attempts to direct traffic away from the worst contaminated areas prove futile as the contamination spreads to encompass virtually the entire market space. The animal situation has deteriorated from merely problematic to actively dangerous as livestock suffering from the environmental conditions become unpredictable and potentially violent. Cattle standing in liquid waste develop behavioral problems that make them difficult to handle, while pigs and sheep create additional hazards by rooting through the accumulated refuse in search of food scraps. The interaction between stressed animals and contaminated environment creates risks that affect both the creatures themselves and the humans who must work around them. The food preparation activities that seemed questionable in the morning have evolved into practices that violate every principle of safe food handling while somehow continuing to produce products that find willing customers. Bread emerges from ovens that have been contaminated by the surrounding environment. Meat is carved with tools that cannot be properly cleaned, and dairy products are handled with unwashed hands and stored in containers that have absorbed various contaminants. As the afternoon progresses, you realize that the sanitation crisis has reached levels that threaten not only individual health, but the viability of the entire market system. The conditions that participants have tolerated in pursuit of economic opportunity have deteriorated to the point where even medieval people's remarkable capacity for enduring unpleasant circumstances may prove inadequate for sustaining commercial activity. The question facing the marketplace community is whether the economic benefits of concentrated commerce can justify continued exposure to health hazards that grow more serious with each passing hour, or whether the sanitation nightmare will finally reach levels that force abandonment of market activities regardless of their economic importance. As the late afternoon sun beats down mercilessly upon Winchester Marketplace, you witness the moment when medieval humanity's remarkable tolerance for unsanitary conditions finally encounters circumstances so extreme that even the most desperate economic necessities cannot justify continued exposure to health hazards that threaten immediate survival. The sanitation nightmare that began as merely unpleasant morning conditions and evolved into midday crisis has now reached a breaking point that will force fundamental changes in how medieval communities organize their commercial activities. The immediate trigger for the crisis comes from an unexpected source, the arrival of a nobleman's hunting party that chooses this moment to water their horses at the communal well that serves the marketplace. Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, accompanied by a dozen mounted retainers and twice that number of hunting hounds, approaches the market area with the casual assumption of privilege that characterizes aristocratic interaction with commercial spaces. His party's arrival serves as a catalyst that transforms simmering sanitation problems into an explosive confrontation between different social classes and their competing claims to public resources. The horses, exhausted from a morning of hunting and desperately in need of water, push directly toward the communal well without regard for the market activities surrounding it. Their passage through the accumulated waste creates a bow wave of liquid contamination that splashes onto nearby merchandise stalls covering expensive goods with substances that render them immediately unsaleable. Master Robert the wool merchant watches in horror as his finest imported fabrics receive direct contamination that destroys weeks of careful transportation and preparation. But the real crisis emerges when Sir Geoffrey's party attempts to use the communal well that has become dangerously polluted by surface runoff from the marketplace waste accumulation. The water that emerges from the well, visibly contaminated and reeking of organic decomposition, proves unsuitable even for animal consumption. The hunting hounds, whose sense of smell far exceeds human capabilities, refuse to drink water that their human masters cannot recognize as dangerous. Sir Geoffrey's response to discovering the contaminated water supply reveals both aristocratic outrage and genuine concern for public health. His loud denunciation of marketplace sanitation draws attention from throughout the commercial area, while forcing market participants to confront the reality of conditions they have been tolerating through desperate economic necessity. "What manner of pestilence have you created here?" he demands of Master Geoffrey the market clerk, whose authority suddenly seems pathetically inadequate for addressing problems of this magnitude. The nobleman's intervention provides the external catalyst that medieval communities often require for addressing problems that have grown beyond local capacity to manage. Sir Geoffrey's social position grants him authority to demand immediate action, while his retainers provide the manpower necessary for implementing emergency measures. His threat to report the situation to royal authorities carries legal weight that purely local complaints cannot match. Master Geoffrey, the market clerk, finds himself facing the complete breakdown of his administrative authority as the sanitation crisis exposes the fundamental inadequacy of medieval institutional frameworks for managing urban public health. His theoretical responsibility for marketplace order means nothing when confronted with problems that exceed any individual's capacity to solve. His appeals to traditional practice and gradual improvement fall on deaf ears when immediate action is required to prevent further deterioration. The crisis intensifies when several market participants begin showing obvious symptoms of illness that can be attributed directly to the unsanitary conditions. Master Edmund the baker, whose constant exposure to contaminated flour and water has finally overwhelmed his immune system, collapses while attempting to serve customers. His sudden illness provides dramatic evidence of the health hazards that all market participants have been risking throughout the day. Other merchants and customers begin reporting similar symptoms: digestive problems, respiratory difficulties, and skin conditions that reflect exposure to dangerous levels of contamination. The realization that the sanitary conditions pose immediate rather than merely theoretical health risks triggers panic among market participants who suddenly recognize that economic opportunity cannot justify exposure to circumstances that threaten their survival. The crowd psychology that emerges from this recognition transforms individual health concerns into collective action that sweeps through the marketplace with the speed and intensity of wildfire. Customers begin demanding immediate refunds for goods purchased under contaminated conditions, while merchants scramble to protect their remaining inventory from further contamination. The orderly commercial relationships that normally govern market activities collapse into chaos as everyone attempts to minimize their exposure to mounting health hazards. Sir Geoffrey's hunting party becomes the focal point for organizing emergency response measures that exceed the capabilities of normal market administration. His retainers begin clearing pathways through the worst contaminated areas, while his hounds, trained for tracking and hunting, demonstrate remarkable ability to identify and avoid the most dangerous zones of contamination. The aristocratic intervention provides both leadership and resources that prove essential for managing the crisis. The emergency cleanup efforts reveal the staggering scale of the sanitation problems that have accumulated throughout the day. The amount of waste material that must be removed exceeds the capacity of any normal disposal system, while the contamination has penetrated so deeply into the market infrastructure that simple surface cleaning proves inadequate. The wooden stalls, cloth barriers, and other temporary structures have absorbed contaminants that make them unsuitable for continued use without extensive decontamination. Master Thomas, the cattle dealer, faces the particularly serious problem of animals that have been exposed to dangerous levels of contamination and may themselves pose health risks to potential buyers. His livestock, forced to stand in polluted conditions for hours, have developed symptoms that reduce their market value while raising questions about the safety of consuming meat from animals exposed to such extreme environmental hazards. The water contamination crisis forces immediate closure of the communal well until proper cleaning and testing can determine whether it remains safe for human consumption. This decision effectively ends market activities, since commerce cannot continue without access to clean water for drinking, food preparation, and minimal cleaning requirements. The economic consequences of well closure ripple throughout the commercial community as merchants realize that their investment in market day preparations may be completely lost. The food safety concerns reach critical levels as the accumulated contamination makes it impossible to determine which products remain safe for consumption and which pose immediate health risks. Master Peter, the butcher's meat products exposed to extreme levels of bacterial contamination must be destroyed rather than sold to unsuspecting customers. Similar decisions affect dairy products, baked goods, and other perishable items that represent substantial economic losses for their producers. The textile and manufactured goods merchants face different but equally serious problems, as contamination has rendered many of their products unmarketable, regardless of their original quality. Master Robert's expensive woolens cannot be cleaned sufficiently to remove the odors and stains they have absorbed, while pottery and metalwork have been damaged beyond economic repair. The financial losses extend throughout the merchant community, as the sanitation crisis destroys not only current inventory, but future market prospects. Sir Geoffrey's decision to order immediate evacuation of the marketplace represents recognition that the sanitation problems have reached levels that threaten public health beyond any acceptable risk. His authority to override normal commercial arrangements reflects both aristocratic privilege and genuine emergency conditions that require decisive action regardless of economic consequences. The evacuation proceeds with remarkable efficiency, as the combination of aristocratic authority and obvious health hazards motivates rapid compliance from market participants who might normally resist interference with their commercial activities. Merchants abandon their stalls, customers flee the contaminated area, and even the livestock are driven to cleaner ground outside the traditional market boundaries. The aftermath of the evacuation reveals the complete breakdown of the medieval market system when sanitary conditions exceed human tolerance levels. The marketplace that seemed merely unpleasant in the morning and challenging by midday has become genuinely uninhabitable by late afternoon, forcing abandonment of commercial activities that represent the economic foundation of the entire community. As evening approaches and you survey the abandoned marketplace from a safe distance, you realize that the sanitation nightmare has forced a fundamental reconsideration of how medieval communities organize their commercial activities. The traditional approach of concentrating large numbers of people and animals in confined spaces without adequate waste management has proved unsustainable when pushed to extreme levels. The crisis will ultimately lead to new approaches to market organization that attempt to balance the economic benefits of concentrated commerce against the practical requirements of maintaining minimal sanitary standards. But the immediate lesson is clear. Even medieval people, despite their remarkable tolerance for unpleasant conditions, have limits beyond which economic opportunity cannot justify exposure to circumstances that threaten basic survival. The Winchester marketplace will eventually reopen after extensive cleanup and the implementation of new sanitary measures, but the memory of this day will influence market organization throughout the region. The sanitation nightmare that reached its breaking point this afternoon has demonstrated that successful commerce requires not only economic opportunity, but also environmental conditions that allow human beings to participate without risking their health and dignity in pursuit of profit.